So what's on the agenda for today's webinar? We're going to give an overview of Runbooks, talk about some of the concepts, and then we're going to jump straight into some demos with some common use cases, things we've seen. We've put together a decent number of example Runbooks for you today to look at. And then we'll jump back again, like I mentioned, to a Q&A session. And then Derek and I and the other panelists will be hanging out, or some of the other panelists will be hanging out on Slack after the webinar. So you can join us there if you have any follow-up questions or just want to ask about anything else in general. So what are runbooks? Runbooks are the ops side of DevOps. So I'm from a development background. I'm used to just, pushing my code, deploying it somewhere, and then I'm hands off, as opposed to Derek, who is on the ops side, who keeps our applications running.
And that's a really great, I like that introduction. It's what Runbooks really does is it really does bring forward the ops side of things within Octopus, and allows you to run these operation tasks to really kind of drive through and automate a lot of that kind of routine configuration stuff that, stuff that often you don't want to be doing that often anyway. And obviously, Ryan, you've done a whole bunch of runbooks as well. But yeah, it's really, really great at kind of just taking over the maintenance, the stuff that no one really wants to be doing, and the stuff that just happens over and over again.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like it's kind of like the chores of your application, right? It's the stuff keeping the lights on, keeping your database clean and performant, keeping your web servers and your infrastructure up to date, those types of tasks on the operation side.
Yeah, when you think about, how many times when you install IIS, is it really interesting? So yeah.
All right. So Runbooks, this new feature of Octopus, why would you want to use Octopus to run these operation processes? With this new feature, they sit side by side with your deployment process and your Octopus project. So a lot of the things that follow from that kind of makes sense. Octopus already knows about your infrastructure. We know about your deployment targets that you're running these maintenance or these operations on. But also there's some other things around discoverability, visibility, security. So for example, maybe some of these tasks that are being run are just scripts that live in somebody's machine or in maybe a Git repo, maybe like a wiki page. So it's like, if this bad thing happens, go here to figure out how to fix it. Where if you pull that into Octopus, just like your application deployments, more people can see what's available and more people can have access to run them. Now, Derek probably doesn't want me messing around with the production database or the production infrastructure, but he can definitely open up some of these runbooks for the lower level environments. Maybe I can run some maintenance tasks or some infrastructure tasks for development and test environments without having to open a ticket and adding it to Derek's queue to get completed. Is that right, Derek?
Yeah, and like one of the key examples is SQL database refreshes. Traditionally, I've had this in the past where you have to restore something to a development machine or a test machine. And what happens is the developer, raises a ticket, wants a backup. I then get that backup. I then get the ticket. I go in, if everything's correct in the ticket, and then I go in, I restore, I do the backup, and then from there I normally zip it up. I'll normally put a password on it, just in case anyone gets access to it that shouldn't. And then from there, they then have to restore the database. So, often that back and forth can take up to 2 days, potentially longer. And having the ability to go in with a runbook, a single click, and you can get that SQL backup within a couple of minutes, really. So you're looking at something that used to take days and now takes minutes. And that's where Runbooks really does help out. It really just, you can use the permissions to really kind of automate as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, and just with these points, especially with Octopus already knowing about your infrastructure, your applications, your configuration variables, it really, I did this maybe 5 years ago now. I was running operations type task in Octopus already. I just set it up as a deployment process. Derek, you've probably done the same. I know we've talked to many customers that also do that. They already have these tasks. They're already running them in Octopus for these reasons. But now with Runbooks, they have like a nicer experience to do it with.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I've saw a few different implementations of it. My preference was always just to go in and disable it. You have your normal deployment process, and then you would disable the application or the developer side of things, and then I would run through and do my SQL backups, and then I'd have to, you'd have to create a release with that, which isn't a great experience, particularly when you're trying to just do a SQL backup, for instance. And I think there's another approach, and you tend to prefer that approach, Ryan.
Yeah, I do. When I did this, I would just set up a separate project for each operation task. So my main one was applying Windows patches to my environments. I would set that up as a deployment process and then run that across the different environments. And you're right, there were some things that kind of like it worked and it was not a bad process, but just some things didn't quite make sense. Like I don't really need to create a release for Windows patches, right? It doesn't necessarily fit into what you normally think of as one of these maintenance tasks. And that leads into some of the differences between runbooks and deployments. So the main thing is your runbooks, you don't create a release anymore. You author your runbook, you test it out, and you're executing directly on an environment. It's not tied to a life cycle. It's not tied to a release. It's its own snapshot that can be executed multiple times. Another thing that is different where your project has one deployment process, you can have many runbooks. So this kind of lends itself more to the style that you were mentioning where you had one project that had a bunch of tasks in it. I created a project with one task each. You can have many runbooks in there. So you can have your database task, your infrastructure task, your emergency failover task, all within your application together with the deployment process. Going back to security, there are those new roles and permissions around authoring and executing runbooks. So they're not tied to the same permissions as deployment processes. So just because you can deploy to production, like deploy your application, doesn't necessarily mean you can run the operation runbooks on the same environments. And again, this goes back to that self-service model where you can enable your team members to be able to run things on certain environments or with certain scopes that are different from your deployment processes. And the nice thing is your variables are shared. So we've talked about differences, but some of the commonality, your variables for your project and any library variable sets that have been imported into that project are shared, which is great because you don't have to redefine all of your configuration. You can use that same connection string that your application uses for deployment in your runbooks.
I absolutely love that feature. It's you can create things at a library variable set, but you're still having to create project variables, and it really particularly with setting up these demos, I've really used the fact that variables are reshared between deployments and runbooks, and it just makes everything so much more reusable and consistent as well. Because not only that, it's the same process that you're running with Octopus as well, but it's also the same variables, and it really gives you that consistent process for runbooks.
Yeah, exactly. Another change, and this is kind of a new model that we've introduced with runbooks, is the idea of drafts and publish snapshots. So let's say, Derek, you've created this restore database runbook, and I'm using it. I'm running it in dev to refresh my database to get that new data to do my development. And you need to add a component to it. You need to update the script. You need to do something to this runbook. How could you make changes and test it without affecting my ability to run it?
That's one of the benefits of publishing your runbook. So there's two different statuses for runbooks. It's in draft mode or publish mode. So anytime you change a runbook, it then creates a new snapshot of it, and that's in draft mode. So if you went in and changed it 15 times and then published it, it's only the final one that is then published and is available for triggers. However, if you were creating something and I was like, wait a minute, this can be better, it can be faster, or I just need to change it a little bit, I can go in, change the runbook, and then make those changes. It could even be to the title, for instance. It could be description settings or within the process. And then I can go in, run it in draft mode against something like a test VM or a dev box. And then from there, I can then publish that. And then as you're using it with triggers or by users, you can then run that runbook as long as you have the runbook run permission.
Yeah, very new like idea of thinking about these processes. So it's like, yeah, very, very handy in that case that you can make those changes and not affect any consumers or triggers that are running.
Yeah, I like the name of the Runbook run permission. It sounds very encouraging. Like say run, but run. Sorry, I apologize, but yeah, it's a very funny
It's
name for a permission.
the little run book who could, right? And then lastly, before we get into the demos, I have to bring this up because it's one of my favorite areas of Octopus, the API. So you may know this already. Octopus is built API first. Every component, every action you can do in the UI has an API endpoint backing it. Runbooks are no different. I've got an example script on the screen that is picking a particular runbook and running the published version of it. So this is especially handy, say, if you have any automated monitoring that can trigger actions or that can talk to a platform like Zapier or if this then that can trigger actions for you. You could even hook this up so that your other tooling can call runbooks for you. The one caveat I put there, and I know Derek agrees with me, is always be notifying. Put a notification in there so you know when it's actually fixing things automatically for you.
Definitely great advice there, Ryan.
All right, that's enough informational slides from me. I'm going to hand it over to Derek, who's going to explain our example app and then show us some example runbooks.
Excellent, Ryan. Thank you very much for that. That was really well done. Okay, so let's get into the demo. We've heard the theory, etc. Hopefully, I've got a really great demo for you today. So let's before we jump in, I want to provide some context. The main reason for this is it's just to make sure that we have an idea of what's happening, so that all makes sense. So in today's demo, we're going to be deploying OctoFX. OctoFX is a sample application that Octopus built some time ago now, and it was really built just to demonstrate how to deploy multi-tier applications. So OctoFX is a fictitious London-based online foreign exchange platform, which consumers and businesses alike can go in and buy foreign exchange and then trade them at a later date. This has a customer-facing website, and then it's underpinned by a Microsoft SQL database. And then lastly, it uses a Windows service to update some of the exchange rates. As I'm sure you're aware, exchange rates fluctuate pretty much by the minute. So yeah, that's the background about OctoFX. OctoFX does actually have a CI/CD pipeline in place. And one thing just to be aware of, we have I've got a webinar called Turbocharging Azure DevOps with Octopus Deploy, where I take you through the CI/CD pipeline of that. But as you can see, we've got a developer machine. They're committing in the code. We've got source control with Azure DevOps repos. We then configured the CI/CD, Azure pipelines to then build the code, run tests, and then create the artifact. It then pushes the artifact into Octopus, and then Octopus then deploys to development, test, and lastly production. And with that as well, there is also a disaster recovery option. That is a triggered deployment, which I'll show you in just a moment. Okay, so this is the infrastructure for OctoFX. It's slightly different to what we normally do, and what we are using is using Azure DevOps and Octopus to deploy this. You'll notice that we have a management resource group, and this is a Bastion box. A Bastion box are also commonly referred to as a jump box. This is where you generally install your SQL tentacles. The main reason for that is that you don't want to be installing the tentacle directly on the SQL server. Just from a security standpoint, you don't want to have to surface that across the public internet. So what we're doing is we're doing our database deployment via the Bastion box, and you can see that that's connecting into a dedicated dev SQL server, and Octopus is then deploying to a dev virtual machine, and then lastly the rate service. Next up is test. Test is very similar. The only difference is different virtual machines, so it's a different web server, different SQL server, and then it's all coming again via the Bastion box. Production is definitely when it starts getting a little bit more interesting. What we've got this at the Bastion box. It's doing the SQL side of things. With production, it is a little bit more complex in that you have an Azure load balancer, and that's currently configured with a domain of octopussamples.com. So each one has an addressable URL that you can get to, but there's also a public facing www.octopussamples.com, and that connects into a rate service. And then lastly, the production SQL server. Okay, next up is disaster recovery. It's very, very similar to dev and test. The only difference is if you go back, you'll notice here that we're deploying to UK South. So we've got a Azure DNS record that we're going to be using today to fail over from production into disaster recovery. So yeah, that is disaster recovery. And you'll see here, these are actually in West Europe. So these are failing over to entirely different Azure regions. Okay, so next up, let's minimize here and then jump into. Okay, so this is Octopus. We've got, this is OctoFX. What you've got down here is the release version, and then we've got across the top, we've got the environment. So you've got your development, test, production, and disaster recovery. So you can see here the disaster recovery, it hasn't been deployed yet. As you can see here, these have been deployed in the last hour and a half or so. The main reason for disaster recovery not being deployed just yet is we're actually using a trigger to promote. So that's just one thing is as much as we have runbooks and triggers, and I will show you that in just a moment, we do also have triggers within Octopus deploy. So I've actually have it so that it's just deploying this to disaster recovery at 11 p.m. each day. And this gives you control over failing over, because what you may be able to do is if you find a bug within the first few hours, you can fail over to disaster recovery whilst you then roll forward. So that's just something to be aware of.
Derek, I do need to point out that you are using dark mode, which is a new feature. So if anybody's watching and wondering about this nice color scheme Derek has going on, this is new in release 2020.1.
Yeah, it's like my new favorite thing within Octopus. You'll notice here that I'm just about to jump into Azure DevOps, and this is also in dark mode. Dark mode for everything. It's not for everybody, and it tends to cause some interesting discussions. Of when I was doing a talk, I created a bit of a discussion afterwards about light mode versus dark mode, and there's no one who seems to sit on the fence. Do you find that?
I sit on the fence. I use dark mode for some apps, but not for others. I don't know why. Whatever I feel like using for a particular thing. I tend to use light mode for websites and dark mode for like Visual Studio Code and desktop applications. I don't know why.
Fair enough. I put dark mode on everything. So it's quite interesting. Anyway, so this is Azure DevOps. I just want to take you through the CI/CD process. What we're doing here is we're specifying the Octo tools to use. We're using NuGet. We're doing a NuGet restore. So if you're familiar with Visual Studio, you'll do this several times a day. And then lastly, I'm just building the solution and then pushing the packages. So that's a database, the rate service, and the trading website. Next up, so once that's done, we then create a release. So what we've got here, we select create a release. And as you can see, we've got this is coming in, the packages are being specified. Within this, we are creating the Octopus release, just specifying some spaces, release numbers, etc. And then deployed to dev, it does one thing, it takes that package and then just deploys it to development. Next up is test. We're then deploying it to test. You'll notice here that there's no gate. That this is going, if I check this in, it's going to take me all the way through to production. We do have a manual intervention just to stop that and just get that approval. But yeah, so this is your CI/CD within Azure DevOps. And then this is your deployment process. I don't want to take too much time here. We have webinars in the past where we've configured this live. Check out Octo 101 getting started. But what we're doing here is we're having a manual intervention, which is then going to just hold off deployments to production. You may find that you have some client approval or DBA approval. And then from there, the next few steps are dealing with the SQL side of things. It's creating the SQL user, creating a database, etc. And then it's deploying to the database, it's deploying the Windows service, and then the last one is deploying the customer facing website. And then lastly, I'm using virtual machines for this one. So with this, it actually writes out the public URL. With this is built into the Azure web app step, and I really like that functionality. I like just being able to click on stuff. So, but yeah, and as you can see here, we've got our variables. So these are the variables that you can use with both deployment processes and runbooks. So what we've got here is we've got some SQL usernames, sorry, SQL names, web app names, locations, etc., usernames, passwords, database servers, database roles, etc. And then lastly, the connection string, which is changed as you go through your deployment and your runbook processes. Okay, so that's a long introduction. Let's jump into runbooks and see what we're doing with runbooks. Okay, so this is the runbooks side of things. I've got a whole bunch of examples. What I've done with today's demo, there's a lot of runbooks that we've created. Effectively, if I had to log on to a server to do something, then I wrote it as a runbook. The main benefits is if you have to scale things, like add additional web servers in production, you can just run these again. And also you can use things like ARM templates or CloudFormation templates to automate your infrastructure provisioning as well. And you can even do that with runbooks. I haven't got an example with this one today, but it is something you can do.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to point out here too, because we are listing, you've got several runbooks here, but this jumps back to the point of you can have many runbooks in a project. So all the things you need to do to operate and maintain your application, you can put them all in this one project today.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, Ryan, is runbooks are actually one of the major benefits. You can basically run with runbooks straight away. Like the built-in processes and our community step template. There's a lot of stuff there with IIS, SQL, etc., that you can basically just pull in to your runbook. So you don't. It's not like you have to use a special step or write a whole bunch of custom scripts. It can just be a single step that it's already there.
Yeah, I'd say based on some of the templates we have in the community library, I think that kind of points to that idea too, that people were using deployment processes to do operations tasks in the past.
Oh yeah, I mean, coming from an ops background, it's funny because I always saw Octopus more of as a kind of ops tool, but whereas the devs always saw it as a dev tool, and I kind of like that, how it balances and it kind of gives you that experience and the split between the teams. But ultimately, that is obviously where it's doing a good job. I think Runbooks really helps, and it kind of emphasizes operations within Octopus.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think what you're showing now, you're showing an existing step. But if you were to click into the add step button, I'm sure you'll get there. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it's like all the same options you have in your deployment process are available to your runbooks.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So you can come into the community step templates. These are all automatically these are all categorized as well. So you can see here, like for instance, if you go to IIS, let's just IIS. There it is there. So you can see here there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can use. I mean, in this instance, it probably isn't a great example of the one I'm discussing, mostly because I did actually write this as an ad hoc script. And all this is doing is installing NuGet, so you can then install PS Windows Update, and then it gets the Windows updates and then installs and then restarts at the end. And that's one of the things, because the first thing you should want to do is install updates. So it's a great use case, and one that obviously you've spoken about in the past, Ryan.
Yeah, that was my go-to operations task from my dev background. That was the one I was responsible for, keeping my dev servers up to date.
What's that? And it's funny because obviously you come from a dev and you're automating things, and when I see it in operations, it's still often not automated. So it's quite cool that you're doing that. Okay, so the next one is actually the example of a SQL restore. What we're doing here is this is just it's got a manual intervention. The only reason for that is production. The database is coming from production, so the only reason I've put a manual intervention there is just as a step to like, hey, wait a minute, this might not be a good idea. But what you can also do it with production, but that would be like a backup and test restore. And I know, Ryan, you used to do this a lot at your previous companies, didn't you?
Yeah, we didn't do it through Octopus. We did it through SQL Server agent jobs. So yeah, we did have uh, the production data restored to our lower levels for testing and development purposes. If you are doing, I'm going to throw in a plug here too, because if you are doing that, definitely add a step in to mask that data so you're not pulling, sensitive data or data that shouldn't be pulled from your production environment down to, dev or test, something a little maybe more accessible than what it should be.
Yeah, and the thing is you can use tools like Redgate's got a tool set that does that randomization for you. So you could build in a randomization as part of this process, which again, it's fully automated. So it gives you somewhere to centrally manage and do your runbooks deployments. And with that, that then that step has run. You don't know if, say, for instance, David, the DBA, takes that back up and puts it in. You don't know if he's actually done the randomization. And that's something, it really does enhance your compliance. But yeah, so this process takes you through it. This is a community step template. I'm running a backup. I'm reusing the variables here. I'm then stopping some services. I then restore the database to, say, for instance, if I'm doing this to test, then it would restore it to the test server. It then goes through and does some SQL maintenance just to re-add the user to the right database so that it's bound correctly, so it can so the application can connect and get that data out. And from there, it then starts the services up. And I'll give you a demo of this in just a moment. And then lastly, again, writing out that URL, mostly just because I'm lazy and I like clicking things rather than typing them in. We've got a failover to primary as well. This is something. This is a runbook that is only ran when you're switching something back over from disaster recovery back to production. And also one thing to be aware of is, make notes, write descriptions, and why, because often what I find is I'll do something as a runbook and then a couple of months later I'll come back and I'm like, what is this doing again? And what was it? Where was I to run it? Because often that's one of the things with runbooks. You can have a runbook and then it runs in any environment, but you may also only want to run a particular runbook within a certain environment. And you can actually do that with triggers as well. So that's just something to be aware of. Be good and write notes, because I know that Ryan, obviously from a development background, he's used to writing notes as he's coding. It's very, very similar, I think, Ryan.
Yeah, your notes look a lot more complete than mine usually are. So I would say everything too is that those fields, those description fields should support Markdown. So you can also do, or a subset of Markdown. So you can put links in there to external sources, GitHub repos, wikis, whatever you would need right in that description.
Yeah, and that's from here you could actually, you'll see here within Azure, I'm using Azure as our DNS server. This actually, you could add in a link to the DNS zone so you can check that it definitely has worked. And that's the benefit of using Markdown. So the next few ones, we're installing some dependencies. And if I had to do it, on a server, like I said, I wrote it up as a runbook. So what we've got here is installing Chocolatey, installing VS Code because I hate Notepad. It's installing .NET so that I can get nice clean logs, and then install IIS and dependencies, and lastly restarts if it's required at the end. This one's actually an idea that I came up with. Octopus.com is having an issue recently. It's hosted on Azure. We're having some gateway issues, and what we were finding was everyone's distributed globally. You would get someone say the website's down, someone would go in, they would restart the web app, and it came up 99% of the time. Ryan, as they say, switch it off, switch it back on again. And the only thing that's making it so funny is it's so effective. And this is one of the, what we've got here is we've got something that checks every 5 minutes. And then from there, it starts up DR and then switches the DNS over. And I'll give you a demo of this very, very soon. The next ones are more not so much, not as important, but what we've got is I've got a couple of runbooks which are starting and stopping environments. So you'll see here that effectively what we've got is a process which is just starting the web server and starting SQL. This is useful because what we've got is we're using triggers to test this every 5 minutes. So you can go through, fail over, and you can have automated failover to DR as well. If it's something you want to check, you could put in like a manual intervention. But yeah, you can. What we've got is triggers where we can start environment, stop environment. So you may find that dev and test and disaster recovery don't have to be online at all times. You know, you may find it's just production. So you could actually use it as well. You know, obviously, there's great use cases out there, Ryan, I think, with spinning up test infrastructure. But what you can find as well is, you know, even just turning stuff off can save up to 2/3 of a hosting cost per month. What's your approach? Do you generally prefer spinning up the environment from scratch every day, don't you?
Yeah, and that's mostly just because ours are for demos and samples. They're not real applications, but I can even see for like a real application in a development environment, if you're hosting it in the cloud and your team is only working in one time zone, you could destroy those resources at the end of the day and then just spin them up in the morning on an as-needed basis, or even do it on a per build basis. Maybe spin it up, run some tests look good, tear the resources down. I think it really is a circumstantial on which approach to take, but turning things off and keeping them alive for the next day is a good approach too.
Yeah, it's a quick win because, you know, if you jump in, it's effectively one line of code for each, a couple of lines. Sorry, this is a wrong run book.
While you're putting that up, I will say it looks like as you get to the bottom of the list, you get closer and closer to my commenting style on the descriptions.
Yeah, I think that's more just there's not much you can say about this. But yeah, no, it's so these are just a couple of lines of code. We're restarting some boxes, and yeah, and that's it. And then we've got one lastly, which is start and stop an IIS. This is as part of today's demo. We're going to fail over production to disaster recovery, and I'm going to do that with a runbook. Okay, so what I just want to do is come back into the overview. I just want to show you that actually we'll jump into infrastructure. You'll see here the target status. We've got 7 healthy and 1 unavailable. If we jump into environment, you'll see that, for instance, we have a Bastion box, which I mentioned earlier on, the website. You'll notice that SQL isn't here. That's all coming from the Bastion box. But as you can see, we've got targets, and you'll see that disaster recovery is currently offline, and that's what to be expected. So let's jump back into the project and then go to development. Actually, I think this may just be quicker if I type in the URLs. Oh, one moment. Dev Octopus samples test.octopus samples. I just want to show that prod 1, as you can see, we do have working Octopus samples, and then lastly dr.octopus samples. This shouldn't be up. If this shows a website, I'm in trouble. So you've got dev. You can see here. You can see it's running on the OctoFX dev. We do have a variable that's been substituted, and it's giving the host name of the server. This is test. We've got prod 1, we've got prod 2. We've got the top level domain, and as you can see, this is currently going to OctoFX prod 1, and lastly dr samples is not working. So what we're now going to do, come into Runbooks, and we're then going to check. What we'll do is we're going to come in and we're going to stop IIS. This doesn't actually stop IIS. I really should rename that. What it does do is it stops the application pool for OctoFX. So if you come in here, select run, what's going to happen is you're going to see that the application pool stops.
Yeah, and then one thing to draw attention to there is you didn't create a release. You didn't go and select an existing release. You just clicked run next to that run book. Now you did choose the snapshot, whether you wanted the published version or a current draft version, but you did
Yeah.
just run that directly.
Yeah, and what you should see is once we have taken this, is just to, we've got prod 1, that's offline, prod 2, that's offline, and then lastly, there we go. So as you can see, everything's offline, dev is still online, test is still online, and disaster recovery is still offline as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to come back and we're going to select monitor primary website and fail over to DR if offline. We do normally have this running on a 5-minute schedule, but when doing the demo, I found that sometimes it was 4 minutes away, sometimes it was 30 seconds. This just knows, this just now, we can do this in the context of, actually, let's read those details. So monitor, this is to be run in the context of disaster recovery. So that's great. This is where the notes come in handy. You come in, you select disaster recovery, you select published, or again, this is, as Ryan was mentioning earlier on, this is where you can run your draft. Select run. Okay.
Right, and those are based on permissions. So if you have the runbook producer, you can create and run drafts, but if you are a runbook consumer, you would only be able to choose the published version.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It's like, and this is what I really like, is you can really give people control over exactly what they're doing. And what we're doing just now, if this is something that you're running every 5 minutes, chances are, you know, I've been on call for probably 10, 15 years in total through my career. And one of the things that you could do is add like a Slack notification. And then anytime this runs and it fails over to DR, post it into Slack. And then chances are, if you get a call, the website's down. By the time that you struggle out of bed at 2 in the morning, rub the sleep from your eyes, find a desk, find your laptop, log on, bring everything up. By this time, the Runbook's already fixed everything. You can go in, you can do, any sort of incident response and go back to bed and pick it up in the morning, or fix the issue and then do that failover. So something to be aware of. So these, what we've now got is, you'll see here that the step, which is just a HTTP check, is going for Octopus samples. It sees that it's down and it's like, wait a minute. So it fails that step out. And then at this point, I've configured this so that it will then go in and then start the environments. So this instance, we're starting SQL. We see web server's taking a little bit longer. Whilst that spins up, let's jump over to triggers. This does take some time. It's starting up a virtual machine and then it's going to fail over the DNS. I will go back to that in just a moment. So this is what we've got now is triggers. So what you'll see is the benefit of Runbooks is not only can you have more than many runbooks to a single deployment process, is you can also, with how it's set up just now, is actually have multiple triggers off the same runbook. So in this instance, I'm applying Windows updates. I'm running the same runbook in development, disaster recovery, production, and test. And the only difference is when it runs. So this is where it becomes really reusable. We've got dev going out on the 14th, just after Patch Tuesday, test a week later, disaster recovery, production's next, and disaster recovery happens almost 24 hours later. Again, it gives you something to roll back to in case of a disaster. And this is the one that I have been using. So it is just monitor primary website and fail over to DR if offline. And this, I did have this configured every 5 minutes, but that's just something to be aware of. I think it's a really great use case. Next one's very much the same as well. We're doing the backup and restore SQL database. This is the one that backs up production and then moves it to dev, test, or disaster recovery. Again, it's using the same one. We have it where we're doing development once a week on a Monday. We're doing test on 8:30 on weekdays, and then lastly to disaster recovery every evening when it turns online, and then it gets a deployment as well. So yeah, it's this is the thing that's it's really useful. It becomes very reusable. And then what we've got is we've got some start, dev, test, and production, DR, and then stops as well. So again, these are just using different environments. and then specifying the runbook to use. And then what we've got here is we're just stopping the DR side of things at 12:30 a.m. This really, it gives you the ability of disaster recovery whilst not having to pay for the full costs. You will have to pay for things like storage, public IPs, etc. And then a last one where we're just upgrading Chocolatey every so often, and VS Code because it's free and it's a really nice tool. Okay, so whilst that's happening, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, I'm going to do a backup. I'm going to back up production, and I'm going to take it to test. And what I generally find is the code goes forward, so it goes through dev, test, production, but data comes back the way. So you normally find that you've got the database in production, and then you want that in disaster recovery or dev or test as well. You know, particularly if you want to do some, say some testing, for instance, take it back to test more often. Is that something that you've experienced a lot of in the past, Ryan?
Yeah, definitely. It's probably one of the more common use cases I've seen.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go. So it's just going to go run through, and it's going to, there we go. So you can see here, it's connecting to the server. It's backing up production. We've got a prod restore. There we go. Everything's good. We're then stopping the application pool. This stops and test. The only reason we stop the services is often I find locks like that can break a database restore. And again, it's only test, so there's no harm in bringing it down. And then as you can see here, we are starting the service. Sorry, we're stopping the service, and we're then, that was a quick database restore. It was 9 seconds. I wish most happened like this. So it's grabbed that same file, it's restored the database, it's then create the user if it doesn't exist, create the database user if it doesn't, and then add the database user to the role. Lastly, it's starting the last few services. What we should find is the database has been successfully restored to test.octopussamples.com. We load this up. There we go. We have a working website, and it should have restored data. Okay, so we've done that. We've so we've refreshed the database. Again, you could do things like SQL indexing, and defragmentation as well. There's lots of really useful use cases of Runbooks in the SQL world, and it also gives you a central location to run them all. Okay, so let's come into tasks. What we should find is there we go. So you'll see here, run, monitor, primary website, and failover if offline on disaster recovery. So if we bring this up, the reason it's failed is it's failed the HTTP test. It started disaster recovery, it started disaster recovery SQL, and then it's failed over. If you have a look at this under task log, there we go. We can see the IPs that have been in use. So it's removed one IP and added the second IP as part of that. What we should find is that dr.octopussamples.com now has a website. Give it a second whilst we spin that up. That's just the application service. And as you can see, just want to be sure, prod 1 and prod 2 are still offline. We now have you have a working disaster recovery. And then if you reload this, there we go. We now have, and what we've got here is it's running on octofx-prod.dr. So what we've done today is run a health check against the website. And then from there, started up disaster recovery, and then switched over the DNS once that's happened. So one of the things that I just want to do just before we finish up, I'm going to select start run. I'm going to select, start IIS. I'm going to select production. I'm going to select run. It's then going to run through. It's going to run start IIS on production. And there we go. What we should find now is prod 1 starts coming up, as does prod 2. So this is, as you're doing this, everything is online. So we can see that prod 1 and prod 2 are back on. We'll come in here, and we're going to fail over to primary. by reading the notes, I know that the context I need to run this in is production. And it's like run. And then what it's going to do is going to do the exact opposite, where it's going to test. And there we go. You can see that 200 is online. Everything's good. It's given the successful response. And then we're going to just wait for the worker to do that deployment. Sorry, the runbook. It's going to switch over the DNS side of things. Whilst that's, let's just wait. Oh, it's normally a little bit quicker than this. Okay. Whilst that's happening, actually, we know that this is all good. So what we're now going to do is we're now going to stop environment, select run, and then at this point, select disaster recovery. Yeah, let's just double check that this is now working. I should. Oh, yep, still running. Let's just tasks are normally a little bit faster than that. Just give it a second.
Well, it knows that you're in the middle of a demo, so it is taking a little bit longer this time.
It's always the way. I find it's you have to sacrifice so much to the demo gods. But yeah,
well, while that's running, I know you mentioned it earlier, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but did you explain the printing out of the URL at the end of your steps? I know you mentioned it, but did you talk about the magic that makes that work? Because there may be some people watching that don't know about this custom commandlet that we've added.
Yeah, it's actually. Let me just. I'll show you. Let's jump into the process. Write out restore URL. It's there we go. It is just a little bit of PowerShell where we're using write highlight. I know that you're a massive fan of this.
Yes, that's why I brought this up.
I knew. So yeah, you can actually just use Markdown using write highlight, and then you can just put that in. As you can see, we're using the URL variable here. It grabs that in, pulls it in, and then prints out the URL. I love it. It's such a basic thing to do, but you don't have to then. It avoids any sort of issue where you go to the wrong test site or something. Because often I find, Ryan, is testing is normally, there can be one testing environment, and I saw some of them. I saw, like, if I'm being honest, I saw hundreds, but generally 10 to 15 testing. So you could go to the wrong URL.
Okay, so have I burned up enough time for your task to have finished with that question?
We'll find out. Yeah, there we go. That took a little bit longer than normal. Let's just jump in. We should see that it failed over. Everything's good. Yep, we see here that the IPs have been switched round. What we should now find is if we go to octopussamples.com. Oh, one moment. Let's just octopus.com. Oh, that has not worked, unfortunately. Anyway, what we'll do is we'll push on from there. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure why, but yeah, it has failed over. What you can do, one thing just to be aware of, is you can come in and just double check, and that's one of the things you could use, is actually use the description settings to go straight to it so that you can verify it. But yeah, we should now be we should now have a working, because disaster recovery is now being switched off. Anyway, any questions?
We do have some questions. It looks like our panelists have answered a lot of them, so we may go into the ones that are already answered just to share some of those answers. But I see one that's still open. How do you connect to SQL Services Azure to add, delete, and restore databases?
You should just be able to do that using steps within Octopus. But yeah, you wouldn't do, I don't think you would do a restore there, but you could definitely roll back to a snapshot. What I would do there is just double check the Azure documentation, and that should give you lots of options around that.
Right. So yeah, so we do have some step templates for calling like the Azure CLI. So you can script out Azure commands. So that would probably be the way to do it. and those can run directly on your Octopus servers or your Octopus instances default worker. You could also set up some custom workers for those to run on if they needed to be run in a specific region or network segment. Let's see. Looks like some of these are follow-up questions. Can the runbooks be called via Jenkins? We currently automate deployments in Octopus that gets called by Jenkins post-build. I'll take that one. That one is a yes. So right now you can call the API to execute a runbook. I think in the future we'll have a execute runbook or run runbook. I'm not sure what the terminology will be, but you'll be able to also do that from the Octopus CLI in the future. But right now the API is the option for you to run those externally.
I'm really looking forward to when that comes up for all of the extensions that we have, like Jenkins, Azure DevOps, because it really just take it to another level, I think, there, Ryan.
All right, Derek. Any news on having just a runbook project rather than having a combined release and runbook? The example would be for handling Windows updates.
Yeah, there's been no update on that. That's a question that we do get very often. You can do it just now, but there's no option to have like a deployment project and then a runbook project. But yeah, unfortunately, that's not something that we have done, and it will probably be some time away. But yeah, that is something that we should be possible, but will likely be a good 3 to 6 months away, as the next batch of work is due to start in a few months.
Yeah, I do that currently. I have a separate project for spinning up my infrastructure. I can't remember why I did it that way. I'm sure I had a reason, but I just have an infrastructure project that runs my infrastructure runbooks or hosts my infrastructure runbooks. So you don't have to have a deployment process as part of your project.
I see a question there from Subakal. Can we find runbooks examples anywhere? If you jump onto, we have a Octopus sample called samples.octopus.app. There's a whole host of them in there, and we'll send that on as part of the email that we'll send over within the next 24 hours. You'll get full access. You can just log on as a guest and click about, and you should have all the access to the scripts as well.
There was a question on, can you target specific deployment targets instead of a role when you're executing a runbook?
Yeah, you would just bind the variable to the target as well.
Well, this would be, say, like in your production one, you've got 2 targets, but I only want to run on one of those. So in the, we didn't show an example of it, but in your advanced options on the run page, when you're choosing the environment to run in, you can go down and it's a similar option on the deployment process. You can include or exclude certain deployment targets based on the environment you're deploying to or executing against in this case.
That's a great question. Another one from Jenna. Is there a way to include a runbook step within the deployment process? Not currently. What you could potentially do there is make an API call within your deployment process. Another approach would be to create something as a step template and then just pull it in as part of your runbook. It is something that we are likely going to be working on and bringing on. And I know that Bob Walker has pulled something together, but it's not officially supported just yet. But we should see this out in the next few months.
Oh, but good news, Derek. I think that's in the community library now.
Oh, yeah. Check that out. Let's, what was it called, that one?
Search for Runbook. But yeah, if you go to the community library and search for Runbook, I believe Bob has published that. So you can use that custom step template to execute a runbook from your deployment process or from another runbook. I saw a question earlier about chaining runbooks, like running a runbook from another one. You would use that same step template to do that.
Yeah, it's, I'm just having a quick look for it. Yeah, it's called Run Octopus Deploy Runbook. That's a lot of runs. But yeah.
I know I've been like consciously trying to like say execute or some other term. Deploy a runbook. That's not the right word.
But yes, that's the thing. But yeah, it's funny.
I will say I've seen a lot of questions that are kind of have a lot of detail around them, especially with like how to use Ansible with Runbooks. That's probably a little bit more than we can get into with the time remaining. If you have any remaining questions, especially when it comes to very, very specific topics like that, email advice@octopus.com. Again, that's going to be in the email that comes out, so you'll know how to contact us. But we can actually, our team, Derek and I, and the other members of our team, we can work with you on some answers for that offline. Derek, do you see
one last one?
Go ahead.
Michael, if your machine gets rebooted because of a Windows update, doesn't it throw an error and have trouble reconnecting? Actually, do you mind? I'm just going to show this one very quickly. Do you mind?
Go for it.
Yeah, let's just parallels.
I had the same problem 5 years ago, and I just let it fail and knew that it worked. That's not a good answer, but that was it was just me that saw the messages.
Well, that's it. It's one of those ones, it fails, but just there is a way to do it. Michael, just what I've just done here is basically installed the package provider, installed PS Windows updates, got the Windows updates, and then installed them, and then accept all with a auto reboot flag, and that will just basically restart anything that does need a restart. Also, with that, you don't always need to restart afterwards, as long as obviously if you use this, then that should just work. Another one, actually, one thing just to be aware of, depending on what you're doing, I actually have a step template that I've written it said just check for pending restart and restart if required. So if you get to the end of something and you want to restart it, then check that one out, and that should definitely help you out.
Sounds good. All right, we are going to, let me go back to share. We're going to do an outro here. Like I said, we're going to hang out in Slack for a little bit longer. If you want to ask us more questions, chat about Octopus and Runbooks. If you have more questions, you can also email us again at that address that we'll include in the email. Resources that we've been using throughout this, we will include all of these links. Don't worry about jotting them down now, but we'll include them in the email that goes out. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, they should be down below in the description as well. We do have upcoming webinars in the future. So we have a joint webinar with Atlassian on the 22nd, and we'll have a security-focused webinar in May, and we'll include links to those registrations as well. Derek, thank you again for joining me and hosting this webinar with me. Great demos. It was a lot of fun. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Derek. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us. We'll see you at the next webinar. If you have questions, contact us. And if not, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.